Recording in progress. And share my screen. Now, where are we? Here we are. Great. So a couple of just small things. One is I was chatting with Mitch on the bus in this morning. Our plan was to do 4 of these Rhino workshops. But as they've gone on, it feels to me like there's probably utility in maybe doing a couple more. If you guys are happy, I'm happy to keep going, and we can look into some more advanced stuff towards the end of as the semester keeps going. I just want to get a rough idea, show of hands, of how many people have started to model their building in 3D or in Rhino in one way or another, even if you just begun massing or something. So everyone's done something. Mm-hmm. That's great, fantastic. What today is going to be another day, a little bit like last week, where we'll do 2 hours on Rhino. Sort of, we're going to be looking at production stuff, so rendering, drawing, diagramming, that kind of thing. We may only touch on rendering today, but by giving ourselves another few weeks of space at the other end, that means that we probably we can just relax a little bit. And I don't mind spending the next whole 2 hours talking about rendering, because it's the kind of thing that could easily take up a whole day if we gave it time. But I just want to get you guys doing stuff quickly, and getting stuff out is the big thing. And then maybe next week we will look at a combination of drawing, but also environmental and modeling and that kind of thing that you can do within Rhino. That I think will keep us busy, and there's more than enough stuff for us to be doing. This afternoon then, or after the workshop, Ricardo and I'll be around. We'll be talking to people. If you've got specific things that you're coming up against in Rhino, you're like, I really want to do this, but I don't know how, then ask me, and I'll see if I can help you. But I suppose I just want to say what's really good is you've got started modeling things in Rhino. You probably have found that you have most of the knowledge now to start building things. Mm-hmm. If you can make surfaces, you can build anything in Rhino. That's how it works, basically. And now all we're looking at is how do we get that process going a bit smoother? How do we get you into the groove of your own production workflow? And then how do we get stuff out? I've called today getting out of your head. The process of design is one where you have an idea in here, but the moment you try and put it out on paper, in a sketch or in a model or in a photograph or in a diagram, then suddenly it's held up to the light of day and you look at it and you go, well, that's terrible. I know what that feels like as well. That process of, it's really good when it's in your head, and then the moment you explain it or you represent it to someone else, they look at it and say, that's rubbish. Or you look at it and you say that's rubbish. Even if someone else looks at it and says that's really great, it doesn't matter because you've decided it's rubbish. So what we're looking at today are methods by which the thing that's in your head ultimately comes out in a way that means that you don't look at it and think that's terrible, but you look at it and reflect on what's good about it and what it could be. And there are different outputs. I mean, this is kind of undergraduate stuff, really, but I think it's really important to have a framework. There are different outputs that do different things. So different drawings represent different stuff. And images and renderings are about representing feelings, atmosphere, materiality, and then it's a really easy way of showing that you have a relationship with the site because you can render something into a photograph of your site. And that's basically what we're going to look at today. So you could go to Headington Hill Hall, take a photo with your phone, come back, model something really quickly, even if it's an idea, a sketch idea, render it into that photograph, and then say, this is what I'm going for. This is the atmosphere or the feeling that I'm going for, without going into the level of drawings, which might be a 1 to 20 drawing, where suddenly, like, what's this wall made of? Well, in a rendering, you only care about what the thing that you can see is, that outer surface. And you as an architect are probably going to know how this is built up, or whether this is a thick wall or a thin wall or structural. Is it, you know, you've got some sense of whether the whole thing's going to fall over or not. But from a rendering point of view, it's more about that atmosphere, the feeling. And then you can go into the details of the drawings, but they're separate projects. You don't use a rendering as a drawing, and you don't use a drawing as a rendering. They do different things. Similarly, you may well produce diagrams that are not renderings or drawings, but they're trying to explain something to someone else about your project. And then it's about clarity. What is it that you're trying to say? And what's the simplest way you can say it? I personally detest Big's architecture, but I think their diagramming is second to none. So if you look at Big's website, it's an awful website. It's almost impossible to find your way around. But they have diagrams for every project, and you look at the diagram and you instantly get it. You can hate it, you can love it, but you instantly get it because it's so clear and so concise. And that a drawing doesn't do that, and a rendering doesn't do that, but a diagram does. And then actually, all of this stuff that we've been talking about is 2D flat images. But as soon as you have a model in your hands, that represents it in a way that nothing else does. So the next thing that I really want us to get to, and for our cross reviews in week 9, we're going to require everyone to have a model of their proposal. And I would really love to see, and I think I'm going to sort of challenge everyone to make sure that that model has some element of digital fabrication in it. So that might be CNC cutting or laser cutting, where you have a sheet of material and you cut out of it. That's called subtractive manufacture, where you start with a large piece of stuff and then you produce waste and you get down to what you need. Or a 3D print. And actually, I would suggest that the best models would have elements of all three. You might CNC your base out of foam, and then use laser cutting for a facade, and use 3D printing for some element of your building. If you 3D print the whole thing, it'll cost you loads of money and it'll look rubbish. But as soon as you bring these kinds of things together, that it starts to really pop. Or even you can print onto an A1 piece of paper and then scalpel out the lines that you've just printed and then make it with your hands. So all of these things, they're different outputs, and you need to know what it is that you're outputting to before you start doing that thing. Otherwise, all you're doing is kind of making blobs in a computer program, which any 14-year-old can do. So I want to start with images and renderings. So how are we going to get the images out? There's a couple of bits of reading that I'm just going to sort of suggest to you. That this pink one, read this week. It's by the big daddy, Mark Foster Gage. He knows what he's talking about when he writes about using computers in architecture and design. He is like, man. Are you familiar with Mark Foster Gage? This is his design for a skyscraper in Manhattan that's taller than the Empire State Building. Man, this guy knows how to control a computer, and it looks crazy, but every single facet of that building he has designed. And it's like a level of computational design that he's at the cutting edge of, or was in the sort of early 2000s. I think other people have overtaken him now. But the way that he writes about it is very switched on in terms of being able to say, no one cares how you do it. Everyone cares about the output. And whether you use this Grasshopper script or this program or that program, or you just sat down and you made it out of boxes, no one cares. Everyone judges what the output is. And the outputs usually are images, which is what we're looking at today. So I recommend having a read of that. I'm just going to reference this guy here, which is a 1970s book on drawing by my friend and yours, William Kirby Lockhart. If you can get a hold of this book, this will revolutionize your hand sketching. But there's this little bit at the beginning, and I'll read it out actually. It says, freedom and discipline in drawing. When students are given freedom in design or drawing classes, they often ask, you mean we can draw it any way we want? You're being given freedom in your design. You can do it any way you want. The question poses a logical or semantic paradox, for the answer is no. For a long time, you will be unable to draw it any way you want, unless you are prepared to have an experienced observer assume you wanted to draw it inaccurately, ineptly, naively, or crudely. You can only draw it in the ways you can draw it. The way I always think about it is if you give a child a pen and they draw like a sort of wibbly house, that's how they can draw a house. And you can look at it and go, well, that's not great. But in their mind, they're producing this amazing thing. And it's the same with computers, that it requires practice to get to a point where that thing that I was saying, where the thing that's in your head and you try and represent it, and it comes out and you look at it and you're like, that wasn't what was in my head. That's rubbish. It requires practice to get better at that process. And it also requires a bit of confidence to see it through rather than just do something and then bin it, and then do something and then bin it, and then do something and bin it. So today we're going to see it through, even if we hate it. Freedom in drawing begins with the disciplined ability to make more than one kind of drawing in more than one technique. It's only then that a designer can be said to have any freedom at all. Freedom and discipline in drawing are two sides of the same coin. They cannot occur alone. So this is exactly what we're talking about. We're trying to get to a point where we have the discipline to do incredibly good, detailed drawings at 1:20, and that our images and renderings have feeling and atmosphere to them. Before we actually move on and start doing something, I also want to show you what I think of as the firm that do the best architectural rendering. And I want to just point one thing from their work out. And it's this. They're a firm called Mir, M-I-R. They're based in somewhere in Scandinavia. Certainly their early work, they're really famous for having just a boldness to the way they render things. Where's the one that always gets me? Yeah, here it is. Man, these renders, they've been given a model that is full of stuff. And what do? They render like a tiny bit of the architecture and they cover the rest in fog. But I get a sense of what that feels like far more than I would from the 1:50 GA or the 1:100 GA or whatever it is. They also have this wonderful like courage to only put their architecture in like 1/3 of the image, but 2/3 of it is the context. And what that tells you is that the project takes the context seriously. Yeah. So when you're looking at composing your render, how much courage do you have to not show some of your building? And that has two great outputs. Oh, look at this one. Look how proud the architect is of every single facet of their amazing football stadium. And then how the renderer has literally just covered it all in fog. It's brilliant. It's there's courage there, because you're outputting a body of work, a portfolio, and no one cares that the render shows everything. And I'd even go as far as to say, if you get good at rendering, you'll go into practice and you'll do what I did in practice a few years ago, which is to push back against people who are older than you about images. And I mean, you've got to be careful with it, but what will happen is people will start using renderings like design tools or like drawings, and they'll say, oh, I really want you to show this thing in your rendering because it's important that we show this. Oh, and can you also do this as well? Oh, and can you also show this? And then after a while, your renderings are dead as photographs because they're not trying to be artistic images anymore. They're trying to be drawings, but drawings do drawings. So let each one do what it's good to do. For the next thing, I am going to need a site photo. I don't really care who sends it to me, but if someone could email me a site photo, that would be great. Do you have my email address? Hopefully you do. Let's see. Let's see who's first.
For the physical modeling part, which one out of these four would be the better way to go about making a dome?
A dome?
Yeah.
Oh, tons of different ways. I mean, you can make it out of paper. You could laser cut a structure and then lay paper over the top.
Panoramic picture.
No, I just want one image from a location. Even, I mean, if it's not amazing, I don't really mind. We could talk about how to make a dome. There's a lot of good ways, but the two things to think about would be structure, like how is the whole thing held up? So is your structure going like from the keystone part down to the ground, or are you kind of building it up? Thank you guys. Oh, great. I've got some images. This is good. I've got one from Olivia. Let's just see how that comes out. Nice. Do we have one from a direction that includes the, yeah, this is nice. That's good. Oh no, not that one. Great. Good options. What was that one? Is that me? Oh, little skinny. Oh, I like this one. That'll do nicely. Great. Okay. Like I say, it doesn't really matter. I'm just going to download that. We'll come back to that in a little while. Up to you how you want to follow along with this next thing, because I'm going to make a little sketch proposal. And maybe it would be good if we all sort of had a bit of input on it. And then you can maybe have a sense of sort of how I would approach like a sketch proposal in Rhino really quickly. I want to kind of get to about 10 o'clock and then have a 5-minute break and have our model kind of pretty much ready to render, if that makes sense. And then we'll spend the next hour rendering it. Yeah. So if you want to follow along, you're very welcome to follow along. Or if you want to just kind of interact and then watch this video back later and do it in your own time, that's also good. Like completely up to you how you want to do it. Different people learn in different ways. So if you want to be doing while I'm doing, then carry on. I'm just going to, there's nothing, there's nothing. I am just going to pull up that image again. And you've probably got really lovely site models, right? That are like super point perfect and they're like, everything's really good. I'm looking at this photo and I'm like, well, it kind of goes like that and then like that and then sort of like that and then maybe like that, and then like that, like sort of. And I'm going to use my command project to C plane on the front view. Yes, I want to delete input objects. And now I've got a flat line that's like this on the C plane, up and down C plane, my kind of wall C plane. And I'm doing this sort of quite crudely, because I'm not going to render this. I'm going to use it as a guide for modeling on. So I'm being really, what's the word? Crude about it. In fact, I'm actually just going to move that so it's in line with, there we go.
Can't you use extrude?
You can type extrude, or you can use the gumball and hold down command and it'll extrude. I'm going to switch to ghosted view. Here we are. We're in ghosted view. And I've got this kind of idea of the site. You guys are going to have point perfect sites because you've spent lots of time on it and it's all lovely. Now, the question then becomes, what's our proposal going to be doing? We're thinking ahead to what we're outputting and then using that to inform the decisions that we make. So one little question. This is the view, right? We've got the building in the background and we've got this kind of slope going down. So what will we be able to see in our final image? What side of the building will we be able to see in our final image? If we render our proposal into here, we're looking at the south side, okay? Will we be able to see anything on the north side? Well, only if we can see through the building to it. So where am I going to fix my attention on this kind of particular moment of modeling? On the south side. And then if I've got time, maybe I think about how, I mean, yeah, I want it to make sense, but also I'm not building a GA plan and then rendering from it. I'm working with a sketch model kind of thing. I'm moving quite quickly as a proposal. This is annoying. Keeps on forgetting where I am. This is why I need a Windows PC, Windows laptop. Right. A couple of different ways to start. Some construction curves are probably going to be in order to get a sense of where we're going. And then it's also going to be really important that I put a person in for some sense of scale. Yeah. Okay. So I've got a person in, and as soon as I put the person in, I'm wondering if this kind of really rough site actually was a little bit big. Just looking at where that what's it called, slope went down, I don't think it was quite that much, was it? So I'm just kind of moving this around until it sort of feels about right. Yeah, something like that. Okay. Because I'm rendering, I'm also going to be trying to be fluid in my way of doing this. Rhino really likes when you make a rectangle to know that the rectangle is 600 millimeters by 1,200 millimeters. Then everything's in exactly the right, I can measure a line and it's exactly 1,200 millimeters. But for now, maybe what I care about is that you're coming from Headington Hill Hall, and your site model is going to be much better at doing this than I am. You come from Headington Hill Hall, and maybe you come sort of down this slope, and then maybe the building kind of wraps around you a little bit like this. So I'm just snapping this to where my site is. And now I can start to play with this line I've just created. This is maybe an interesting line from a plan perspective, but also maybe I want to I'm just letting my fingers do the talking here. Maybe I want to guide people in a particular way. And maybe this line, do you see this line is now kind of emerging out of the landscape and coming up? Maybe actually this point here could come up into a wall, right? So when you come down from Headington Hill Hall, there's this wall that kind of guides you around and then into the landscape. Maybe, I don't know. I'm just playing here. Then this thing, you know, to what extent does this have a kind of ability to enclose? Well, one thing that I might then do is to think about, okay, what if I do another one of these lines, but then lift it up so it's over this guy's head. Yeah, and it's still following the line of the surface, but it would be even nicer if it kind of tapered down a little bit. Although actually thinking about it, this guy here, I want to lift that up so it feels like it's kind of got enough space over his head. I don't want my resulting thing to be like on his forehead. Mir. Yeah, so this is a polygon. It's a series of polysurfaces, a series of surfaces, really simple surfaces. They're just extruded lines. But because the edge is a line, I can use the Mir snap to snap to anywhere on a line. I mean, if you've modeled yours as a mesh, you might then want to be using vertices as a snap. But you know, however you want to do it. Can I nominate someone to keep an eye on time for me as well? When we get to about 10:02, just give me a shout. Now, if I look at this in plan, again, I'm trying to kind of look at it from a section point of view, from an elevation, from a plan, from different angles, you know, just keeping my eye on things. I'm suddenly thinking about this. This is a really interesting space here. You've got this wall bringing me down, and then I've got maybe this kind of, it's a place that's covered, but still outside. And then maybe this is the boundary of the building that where you actually go inside into something. And maybe this is where we want to sort of take people. Who knows? Let's find out. So one of the things I could do maybe is just draw like a completely straight line and then see what happens if I loft between these. So now what I have is this kind of wing that's coming out, but it's then going into my site surface. Actually, now that I've looked at that, this line here is just a little bit, you see, that is a bit ugly to me, that kind of angle there. So I'm going to push this back into the hill a little bit. I'm going to delete this surface and then do that loft again. Loft. And it's not quite perfect because it's kind of gone into the ground a little bit there, but I'm rendering it. I don't care about these kinds of things. I just want to get a sense of space and scale and height. I've also got a problem here that as soon as you go into this covered area, there's not enough head height. So actually, maybe one of the things I want to be doing is to lift this guy up. And again, we'll do that loft again. Let's see what happens. There to there, loft. And now I've got this space in here might be a kind of, you could sit and meditate in there, or you could sit and talk with some friends. Even better, maybe if there was a kind of opening in here, or it let in some light, or there was a view out. You can see suddenly there's a view out to the trees along the south now, this way. It wasn't there before. So there's a kind of way in, there's a way out. I could start to play with some of these things. Maybe this whole thing is just a little bit squat. So maybe we're just going to lift it up a little bit, give ourselves a little bit more space to play with. Yeah, I don't know, something like that. I've got a new layer. I'm going to call it surface. I'm going to change that to that layer because I want to be organized. I want to keep things all in order. This guy here is a wall, right? It's just a straight wall. So the easiest thing to do is just to extrude it down. I can use the gumball and hold down Control. It just makes me this kind of nice, like, fillety thing. And I've got this whole load of stuff under the ground that I don't need anymore. So what I can do is type trim, select the ground, and then trim that away. Just clicking it. Press enter when done. I've pressed enter, it's done. Yeah. So there's my wall. I'm going to set that on my surface. Now this wall also has a thickness. So I want to offset surf. And I'm going to use the option solid yes. I don't know, is it 200? Is it 150? Something like that. I'm going to use loose and don't delete the input. Yeah.
I've done lots of offset of the lines, but when I go curved line and I've got only 3 points, it comes out with
Yes, absolutely. Okay. I'll just do a tiny quick aside on that. Control point curve, 3 points, offset, 1,000,000 control points, right? Okay. In the real world, this is what people do. They take their curve and they turn it into 2 straight lines and an arc. And then they trim it. So that's an arc and that's 2 straight lines. Yeah. Now, if I offset that, I have to join it together. There's an easier command than the one I just did. 2 straight lines and then type fillet. And it'll ask you for the radius. Maybe the radius is 2 meters, something like that. That wasn't enough. Radius 5 meters. There we go. So now what I've got is a joined curve, which is a straight bit, a bit of a circle, and then a straight bit. And if I offset that, exactly the same number of control points. And the reason is that a circle has a common center, but a NURBS curve it can't do it. There is a way that you can offset this, but mathematically, you can't have the same offset all the way along the curve and the same number of control points. So that's the kind of crazy number of control points. But if I offset this one and choose loose, then what it will do is it will make a curve with the same number of control points, but it can't promise you that this distance is going to be exactly the same all the way along the curve. It usually gets it pretty close, but mathematically it can't promise you that it's going to be the same distance. So those are your 2 options. You can use a loose, or you can turn your lines into straight lines and fillets. And straight lines and fillets is exactly how Zaha Hadid draws her plans. Straight line, fillet, straight line, straight line, straight line, fillet, 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 fillet. And you see how, like, look how sinuous that is. they're all straight lines and fillets. And the reason is when you get on site with a builder, you give them a bit of string and a bit of chalk, and they put the string in the ground, and then they draw the arc, and they're like, that's where we build the wall. You give them a NURBS curve, they've got no idea where they're going to build the wall. So that's the way that becomes rationalized. This is a process of rationalization where you take your flowy thing and you turn it into a series of straight lines and fillets. When we talk about fabrication, that's going to be an important one. That's a good question there. Yeah.
If you want to excavate the site, for instance, you want to like, you know, something, embed something in it.
Yeah.
How would you find the base?
Well, we could use booleans if you want.
Yeah.
So let's extrude this surface and turn it into a big block. Yeah, like a big block of cheese or whatever it is. I'm just gonna select these guys. Call it a base. So there it is. And this extrusion, we're going to call it site extrusion. And I'm going to turn it off because it's a little bit confusing having two things there at the same time. You want to dig a hole in the site, right? So I've got some kind of solid. You could make any kind of closed solid. Could be a big blob, could be a box, could be a sphere, could be whatever. And we're going to use a Boolean operation. So you type Boolean and you're looking for Boolean difference. And it'll ask you select surfaces or polysurfaces to subtract from. So you're going to select the bits where you're subtracting. Press enter to continue. Select surfaces or polysurfaces to subtract with. Delete input, yes. If I click this square, now it's made. Oh, slightly annoying. That worked. Because I locked it rather than hid it. There we go. Yeah. So we were looking at the surface on the top, and I was like, oh, why hasn't it made me a hole? This is now that big block with a chunk taken out of it. Yeah. Does that help? Cool. Great. I mean, architecturally, then we'll have a conversation about digging a big hole in the site. But you know, that's how you would do it. Right, I want to get on because it's 1:45 and I want to actually start modeling some stuff. There's something about this thing, and especially with lofts, what you often get are kind of sail-like roofs. Yeah. But there's something really interesting about this roof to me. And it's that these 2 points are like, there's this saddle. Yeah. And maybe there's something really interesting about these 2 points where rainwater comes in. Because that, if rain falls on this anywhere on this roof, it's going to go to here, and it's going to go to here. Those are the 2 lowest points. And it all sort of flows down. So it might be interesting to think about rainwater and how that flows. And potentially there's some kind of landscape here, some kind of garden or something. And maybe there's a flow of rainwater down and then round. So maybe part of our inside outside thing is, I'm just going to play with this for a little while now, is some sort of canopy that plays with this idea. I mean, you guys have got weeks to do this. I'm doing it in like 2 seconds, but I'm gonna loft between this curve and this curve. Let's see what happens. So there's something there that could well be a kind of covering for an inside outside thing. And then maybe I want to take that even further tap Alt and just make a copy, take it even further for some other kind of element here, but maybe rotate it round. So it starts to kind of come up again. So we're really coming down to this point here. Maybe there's something really important about this point on the site. Here we go. Loft between this curve and this curve. Oh, there's something starting to come through here. Do you see that? I mean, actually, there's a slight problem. And I don't know if you see the problem, but it's that when you look at the project from this kind of angle, it's got something nice going on. If you look at it from this kind of angle, there's this kind of, okay, well, maybe we could have an opening here and it becomes really clear this is where you go in. And then there's some kind of structure that kind of flies out, like draw it even like from here to here to here. This kind of structure that's holding it up. See? And maybe there's a few of these all the way along. But the slight problem is the photo that I have of the site, we're going from this angle and it looks really ugly. I don't really like it. So I'm gonna get rid of this last one and I'm gonna start playing with this guy here and just see what I can do. In fact, even nicer, I'm gonna turn record history on. So then, what's that? Oh, thank you. Brilliant. Fantastic. This guy, let's move him along this line, just a little bit closer in. I think there's something going on here that's a little bit weird too. Yeah. It's deleting that loft, record history, loft between that and that. Who knows? Who knows? It's got, I mean, there's something kind of nice and flowy about it. And as soon as you see these kinds of flows, you may be thinking, oh yeah, well, definitely there's rainwater going on. I've also got this line here that I think I wanted to be some kind of boundary wall, some kind of thing that kind of encloses this space. Kind of like this idea of this opening, but you know what would be even nicer is if I copied this line up and then this guy here, I'm just gonna pull that lip down from here to here, record history on, loft that together, lovely. Because now I've got this kind of, this is a nice big open eye. And then this is a much more closed south side. And now when I stop and think about it, oh, this kind of makes sense because I've got a south side that has loads of sun coming at it. I've got a north side that's nice and open. I've got this view going down the hill towards the city. I've got this kind of link back to the Headington Hill Hall. This is where the entrance is. Yeah, you know, I can make this work in a tutorial. I can blag this, you know. And literally, how many surfaces is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 surfaces. So we're being really fast and fluid. Now, a couple of things, probably just looking at this, there's this moment here where the outside wall is further away than our roof. This is probably a little bit like, no, well, that's not quite working. So this line that was a straight line, I'm probably going to have to think about bringing that in as a curve rather than a straight line, because this is an area I don't really like. It's a bit 1970s Fry Otto kind of stuff. So all I'm going to do is just make a control point curve that is on my construction curves layer, because it's important to use layers, everybody. Yes, it is. This line has now moved, because do you remember I dragged the roof up after I'd lofted it. It's a really good idea to not do what I just did then, and instead reposition your control point curves and then reloft. Because now what I've got to do is I've got to move this line to be exactly where this line is. Now, luckily, I can do that. I can use the M tool, the move tool, and I can click there, and then I can click on that end point. And then I know that that line is going to act like perfectly match up with that thing. Just one more thing about lofts, actually, while I'm doing this. Do you notice I don't care that these are separate surfaces? I'm not trying to do the whole thing in one loft, because if you try, you'll just be battling against the computer. Keep your lofts simple and just build them up. Okay, now I'm turning this into a nice curve. So I'm just going to bring that curve out a little bit, and maybe this guy comes up. And this guy is still kind of into the ground. So there's a connection to the ground there, which we can start putting some structure in place. So let's loft, record history on, loft that curve to that curve. And I mean, it's not perfect, is it? Because this is kind of poking through, but just bring it down a bit. And luckily record history was on. So I don't have to redo my loft. It's worked quite nicely.
Why did you get that curve off? There was already the edge, and then you did loft it upwards. Another curve to loft in between.
Say that one more time.
The curve that you moved with the move tool.
This one?
Snap it to the existing.
Yep.
But there was already an edge there. So you need to.
Yeah. Yeah. So I lofted this surface, then I moved it. But when you make a surface, the edge of a surface is a curve. So you can loft from the edge of a surface to the edge of a surface in the same way that you can loft from a curve to a curve, because the computer thinks of them in exactly the same ways. In the same way that the end of a line is a point. I could put a point there. That's a point, but in the computer's mind, that's also a point, even though you can't see it in the same way. So I was using the fact that the edge of the surface was the same as the curve that lofted, that the curve that made the loft has to share the construction curve. They must be the same because I've lofted between the two curves. If I'd rebuilt it or like moved it or like squiggled around with control points, it wouldn't be the same anymore. So this is why construction curves are really helpful. Okay, now this is a really good lesson because I don't like this. I don't like it. I think like looking at it from this angle, this line really annoys me. Like everything else about the curve, everything else about my proposal is like fluid and it follows the surfaces, and there's a nice sort of argument going on there. I could try and fix that by just extract iso curve, and it's going the wrong way. I want the middle line of this surface, so I'm going to type T to toggle, and I want to take this middle line, which is midpoint of that. And now I've got this curve that I'm going to put on my construction curves. Here we go. And the way I'm going to do this now is I'm going to make a loft with 3 points rather than 4. And I can drag this one out a little bit. And you see this point, this point, this point will form a curve. So I've got control over the edge of my loft as well. But there's a difficulty that I'll explain this in just a second. Just going to put record history on, and I'm going to loft between this, this, and this. And now I get this nice curve there. And suddenly, okay, right, yeah, okay, I can make that work. There's still a straight line here, but you know, we don't quite care about that view in quite the same way. The only difficulty is that now this surface is called a doubly curved surface. This surface, single curved, because it's gone from one curve to another, and every single iso curve in between is a straight line. Another name for it is a ruled surface. These you can make out of paper. You just cut out a piece of paper and kind of bend it, and it would give you a perfect representation of that. This you cannot make out of paper. You can't laser cut it. You can't 3D print it. Well, you could 3D print it, but it wouldn't be nice. You can't CNC it. It's if you extract isocurve, every curve in this direction is like a wibbly wobbly curve, and every curve in this direction is a wibbly wobbly curve. They're all different. And that means it's impossible or very, very difficult to manufacture. So whilst this is going to look nice in a render, when I make a physical model of this, I'm going to have to do something different. Did you see where I'm going with this? Like my physical model is not going to be the same as my render model. Okay. And finally, I think probably what I want to do is I want to have some sort of sense of where we're going inside or outside. This isn't perfect, but let's go from here to, I'm going to go kind of like through the roof because I can always trim it back later. Hopefully what I'm about to do will make some sense. Loft these two. Then this becomes maybe some kind of glazing or some kind of wall build-up. And we'll punch a hole through it in just a second. And to help us, I'm just going to trim off this surface. There we go. So now my wall goes exactly up to the roof surface that I've just made. So I'm going to make a new thing called glazing. Change my object layer, and I'm going to make that kind of color so I can see that's different. Now my guy is kind of facing the wrong direction, so maybe around. Oh, where are we going? Not perfect. And actually, like, I feel like this view is much more looks like we're going outside, everyone. I'm just going to pause the recording. I'm just going to keep going, and then people can kind of catch up as we come back. It's all on the recording. This is exactly it. Once I've joined these together, if I want to give this some thickness, I can use offset surface. But sometimes, and the thing to check is when you offset a surface, it'll give you these little white arrows everywhere. You probably realized I've joined these together, so they're one poly surface, but there's no guarantee that all the arrows are going to point in the same direction, because whatever the arrow's pointing in, that's the level of thickness that's the direction of the thickness it's going to go in. So it's well worth checking. And if you need to flip them, you can click. You just click the item, and then the arrows switch over the other way. So you can decide which way you want to do that. I think I'm going to go up, and I'm just going to give it quite a thick. It's not going to be particularly thick. Right? I don't know, 100, something like that. And we've got a couple of interesting things here. So one is this guy here has not worked in quite the way that I thought it might. So that's almost certainly to do with the way that they're all joined together. You can see this is just like a mess of stuff in this corner here. So actually, what I'm going to do is unjoin. Explode. Sorry, explode is the opposite of join. And I'm going to make these thick separately. Offset surface. There's one. There's two. There's three. They work much nicer. So it's no biggie really. And then you also see that because of the fact that these surfaces are much simpler on their own rather than being poly surfaces, I get far fewer isocurves. So it's much lighter geometry. Let's call it roof. It's a roof. I don't yet know what it's made of, and that we've got something there to figure out, haven't we? About exactly how this works. But we'll see. It looks a little bit like this hasn't quite matched up, but it's a rendering. I don't care. And in fact, if anything, it might end up looking really cool. In fact, if I go to rendered, yeah, there's some cool things here. I kind of like this. It's a bit Jean Nouvel Abu Dhabi, isn't it? That one which is just like loads of circles all intersecting with one another. Right, ghosted. This glass, no one makes glass like that. Everyone makes glass in panels. So in order to represent that properly, I'm gonna make some mullions that are holding all my glass panels together. And the easiest way of doing that is to extract isocurve. And we're going to extract a series of isocurves along this that form pipes that are going to split up my glass surface, because this just doesn't look realistic in the slightest. Now, I could just click randomly, blah, 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 blah. But there's a slightly easier way, which is this is the construction curve from which I got the base of my surface. Yeah. If I type divide and divide it into, let's say, 10 segments, then what I end up with are 10 points equally spaced along that construction curve. Yeah. And then if I click on this guy here and extract isocurve and make sure that my point snap is turned on, that means I can click along all the points. If I switch to wireframe, this is going to be slightly easier to see because there's a surface in the way. But now I get my isocurves exactly regularly spaced out across there like that. Yeah. And now that I've made all these isocurves, I'm actually going to, well, they're in the mullions layer because I just made them. And now I can type pipe, give it a radius of, I don't know, 25. And now I've got these solid pipes that split up my glass surface. Yeah. And I'm also, just from a rendering point of view, I'm going to offset surface for this glass. And you might think, well, why do I need to do that? If I give it a little distance, I'm just going to, I don't know, 20 millimeters or something. And now this glass now has thickness. So I can kind of see how this whole thing works. Like, I'm going to be honest with you, I kind of hate this, but I'm just going with it. Let's not worry too much. Right, yeah. So what happens with glass is if you render glass as a single surface, then what you're effectively saying is everything behind this surface, I want to treat like the surface of a piece of glass. And it'll do weird things like it'll refract stuff in a really crazy way. If you give glass thickness, what you're saying is my glass starts here and stops there, refract everything through it, but then reflect everything either side. So now that I've given that glass thickness, it should render properly. So generally speaking, never try and render glass that is just a single infinitely thin surface, because it will look a bit odd. It won't work quite the way that you think it should. And now at some point, I'm probably going to also want to take this guy here and close up that hole, that gaping hole in my building. And the easiest way that I could think of doing that is probably to do one of these two things. I could split this line by a point, and I'm just going to choose a point that's kind of inside here, like there. There we go. And here's a curve. And again, I'm just going to drag that up. So it's gone through my thing, and then trim that away. But that is, I want this to be a surface. And actually, if I go back to ghosted, you should be able to see that. Like you're going to want to start doing some things to kind of actually architecturally make this work. I can see I've got some real issues here. Trim that. I can't trim it because it doesn't go all the way through. That is rather irritating, isn't it? I could Boolean difference it. It starts to get really messy if you're not careful. Actually, what I'm going to do is take this glass and these mullions and just be a little bit more careful where I loft it from and to. So just bring that in a little bit there. And then because I've still got the construction curves, it's the work of literally a second, or maybe 5. Come in. 1, 2, loft. Okay. Extract isocurve. Divide 10 segments. Extract isocurve onto the mullions channel. Oh, in fact, actually, it's mostly done a pretty good job of keeping that in line. I mean, these are a bit off, but I'm not going to care about that too much. And trim that away. Okay, I mean, yeah. You can like it, you can loathe it. I don't like it, but I'm also trying not to care. I'm going to give this some thickness. And we might have to do a bit of tidying up, but we're kind of getting somewhere, aren't we? Isolate that and select these guys and just move them down so they're not poking through the roof. Right, tons of stuff we can do, starting to get somewhere. I'm going to do a couple of things. This guy here, this is my site extrusion, right? I'm going to turn it off because I don't need to render the site base because I've got a photograph that has all the grass in it that has everything that I need it to be. I'm just going to save this quickly. Make sure you save. I can go to my photo. I think I downloaded it, didn't I? In my downloads folder. This is it. Here we go. Looks like that. Right. If I drag this in to here, it gives me some options. Picture is what we usually do. We kind of drag a square out, which shows you the picture. If you click wallpaper, it will set, or should. I think I need to put safe frame on. Hang on. let's just check. This worked when I did it last night. Let's try again. Wallpaper. Choose viewport property. Ah, you shouldn't need to be in rendered mode. It should just work. Yeah, it should work for all of them. Hang on. These. Ah, I turned it off. There we go. In your properties, your view properties, you now have a wallpaper and the file name is just set to whatever the file is that you've just dragged in, show, and then gray. So I can turn gray off and I can see some color. I can show it, I can turn it off. I can go back to how it was. Now this is really useful because now I'm moving this guy around in 3D space, but I've got my reference image behind it. So I now know what's going to happen when I render this thing. And suddenly I'm like, well, I've designed this badly. Because what I really want to do is put it like this, right? But if I do that, it's not quite that relationship with the building that I thought it was going to have. And when I put it round this way, so that it's kind of really working for me, maybe I can just about. Now, this is where the Mir people would be like, why don't we just put it like that? Like not even in the middle of the image. Like actually what we're thinking about is what's the best image that we are creating that gets my project across. Yeah. Who knows? And really, I'm just guessing. I'm also really helpful. There's a person in my image and there's a person in my thing, so I can get the scale roughly right. If I hold down Control, right click and drag up and down, I've got a bit more control over that scale. I don't have to like scroll wheel to go doo, 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 in and out. I can just hold down Control, right click and move my mouse up and down and it'll set that. Let's do something like this. I don't know. We'll try that. We'll try that. And when I'm happy, I'm going to go to Set View, Named Views, and save it. I call it Render Perspective 1. And then if I change my mind about something and like move it all around, I can go back to my Named Views and click it and everything will come back. Okay. Now I've got my view set up. I've got my photo that I'm rendering it into. I'm not very happy with it, but I'm going to put something out. In fact, because I'm not happy with it at all, I'm just going to do it a bit more like this. Right. So it won't, like the photo is 2D, has no depth information at all. If I want to see shadows, I could turn my site extrusion back on and go to something like a rendered view. Yeah. And now I can see where the shadows are going to be falling. But when I render it, I don't want to have that base on. And I'll show you how to do shadows in Photoshop in just a minute. Now, there's something else that I want to make sure that we get right. And it's this. When we render it, we're going to render with a light source. And that light source has a direction. And that light direction is going to influence which way the shadows are going to go. Now, at the moment, I don't know if you can see, but where's the sun coming from in my model? Roughly. It's coming from up here, isn't it? Because he's in shadow and he's being covered by this thing here. And there's a shadow here and a shadow here from this lip. Yeah. So the sun's coming from this direction in my model. Where's the sun coming from in my photo? Top left, up right here. So if I render this and plonk it in, there's no realism at all. And the human eye, you won't be able to tell why, but it'll look weird. It'll look really weird. So what I'm going to do is type sun, and I'm going to turn on manual control. I'm going to override the date, the time, the north, whatever, all the things that I could just let Rhino do it. And if you can make this work, then brilliant. So you set the location in the world, you set the time, the day that the photo was taken, and it should match up. But it's easier and quicker to just do this. I can grab my sun and change which direction it's coming from. And I'm not really, at this point, worried about whether it's coming from north, south, east, or west. I'm looking at the image, and I want the shadows to match up with my image, my photo, my reference photo. Yeah. If you spend ages trying to work out the vector maths, it'll just waste time. So instead, what you're thinking is, I want it to look like the sun is coming from top left in like this, well, in like that. So I'm going to move this round until it makes some sense. And if I get to, well, it is west, so it is aligned fairly well, like not far off. I can change how steep that angle is coming down. So I make it really, really shadow. You see it starts to go yellow. The yellow sun is like sunrise, sunset. And then the higher it is, the whiter it is. I'll show you how you can override that in just a second. So I know the sun is fairly high in the sky in this photo because we took it in, what was it, September. So it's not going to be like super shallow. And it's probably coming from this kind of angle. So like it's an unrealistic angle because I've changed the orientation of my model in model space, and the photo is taken at a particular angle. So none of this is going to be realistic. So again, we're not making a diagram about sun studies, we're making a render. So I'm just want to grab it, move it around until it looks about right. Let's try that. Let's try it, see what happens. What's the worst that can happen? We'll just give it a go. Okay, I've put my sun in. And I'm going to fire up V-Ray. If V-Ray isn't working for you, then you may need to go to Render and Current Renderer and select V-Ray for Rhino. All the computers here have V-Ray installed, so this should work for you. If you can't get it to work, speak to someone else who has got it to work, who's used V-Ray before. Has anyone used V-Ray before? Kate, Alexia? Okay, great. Okay. Once you get this window, this is the asset editor. This is kind of how you set everything up in V-Ray. And it's got a few different options along the top. So we're going to go from left to right, and we're going to get everything set up. So the first thing is materials. So I'm going to move this over here so I can see my model in here. Oh, also, did I save this view? I don't think I did. I moved it, didn't I? I'm going to make a new named view and call it perspective 2. This one's better. There we go. Okay. We're going to make some materials for our render. And for now, I'm not going to worry too much because we can get into materials. You will probably find there's a little left-hand arrow, and it brings up a material library, which is a really great place to start. So I can say, oh, I want, I don't know, I want it to be a wooden kind of timber, like surrounding wall. Let's find some timber. Maybe it's plywood. And I drag it into my material palette here. These are all the materials in the project that are ready to be used. So I dragged it in, and now here it is. And now all I need to do is just drag and drop. Boom. Now I've got this material. And there's one weird, annoying thing going on, which is that I made a surface and then I extruded that surface. And now I've got a surface and a poly surface right next to each other. And renderers don't like two surfaces that are like right on top of one another. They don't know what to do. So I'm going to take my surface. I know I can recreate it because I've still got the construction lines. Just delete it. And now suddenly everything looks a lot nicer. Yeah? Materials are actually pretty easy. I mean, I could go into a lot of detail about materials, and we will at some point if you want to, but the easiest way of doing it is to start with some generic materials, drag and drop them in, and then fiddle with them until they look about right. If I drag this in, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking the wood grain is like ridiculously huge, isn't it? Yeah, because that's a person. There's no way wood looks like that. So what I need to do is go to my texture mapping for that object. So I clicked the object, I went to properties, and I clicked this little wrappy thing. And then I'm going to change that to, I'll leave it on surface. Yeah. Oh yeah. Sorry. How's that? I'm going to leave that on. No, I'm going to use box. I'm going to use a box mapping. As soon as I click box mapping, do you see how this has gone like really smooth? And it's because it's now, you can't even see it. It's like big or small. I think it's too small. So I've just locked these numbers and I'm going to use a little cheat, which is this texture says 50 centimeters. So what that means is the real world 50 centimeters is the size of the image in that texture. So if I set this to 500, it should start to look a bit more realistic. And there we are. That looks much more like some plywood. Yeah. Now, there's a lot you could say about this. Like plywood in the rain doesn't work like that. But are we leaving this? I'm just applying a texture to an object in the scene. Similarly, let's find some glass. Looks quite nice. Once you're happy with it, drag it in. And as soon as I dragged it in, it's basically gone see-through because the renderer is saying this thing is basically completely see-through. But when we render it with V-Ray, it'll have reflection. It'll start to actually pop like real glass.
Both of those lines, I know you extruded it. It's not like
Yeah, it's a solid thing. So it's got edges. It's got a little line along the top. So the whole thing is now a glass object.
how, if I wanted to like inside or different glass to make two.
Yeah, you'd have to make two surfaces next to each other, but the glass would ideally have a thickness.
Yeah.
Okay, so you get the idea, right? I mean, maybe this wall is a kind of dark gray aluminium anodized thing. I don't know. We've got no idea. We'll figure it out as we go along. I can also make my own material. I'm just going to make a generic material. I'm just going to call it gray. And this material, I've got complete control over this now, so I can set the color of it, and it'll update this little nice window here to show you what it is that you're doing. Maybe it's kind of red. Maybe it's kind of blue. That's just a simple material. I can also say, actually, I think I want it to be reflective. So if I drag this up, then suddenly you start to see reflections appearing in it. Maybe I want it to refract, which is really cool. So it starts to become a bit see-through. So you can see through it, even though it has a color. Now, basically, that's what materials are. They have a diffuse color, an amount of reflection, and an amount of refraction. So glass has lots of refraction. You can see through it. Not much color, but quite a bit of reflection. But this plasterboard stuff, you can't see through it, so there's no refraction at all. It has a diffuse color, which is white, or this kind of mapping of dirty stuff. And it has a bump. Yeah, you can add bump. You can add all sorts of things we can do. Do you see what I mean? I'm going to turn the reflection off. The reflection, I don't want really any reflection at all. And then I'm going to make it a kind of gray color. Maybe a little bit lighter. There we go. And I'm going to chuck that on the roof just to see what happens. And it's all three of those. There we go. Right. Okay, so we've got some materials and we've added it to the scene. Then we've got lights. We've got the sun, because we typed in the word sun and we turned it on and we've got manual control. Rhino's V-Ray's picked up that there's a sun, and it's going to make a sun shine in the same direction as the Rhino sun in the viewport. So I don't have to do anything else other than let the sun do its thing. That's what the sun is there to do. I can override a few things about the sun. Like at the moment, the color mode is filter, but I can turn it to override, which means the sun will always now be a perfect white color. So if you put the sun really low in the sky and you get that dirty yellow, weird sort of sunrise color, and you don't want it, you can override it. You can make the sun any color you want. I tend to do that quite a lot, but when the sun's high in the sky, it's kind of helpful to have a bit of a tinge, a sort of yellowy tinge, to make it look a bit more real. And the size multiplier is like my super tip for making things look great. Do you see that there's clouds in the sky? And clouds scatter sunlight over a wider area than just the sun. In a blue sky day, no clouds, no nothing, what you'll find is the shadows are really harsh. Like 1 point light source, really harsh outline of a shadow. But these shadows, you see, they've got kind of, they blend, they blur. And that's because the light is being reflected around from different light sources. And you can kind of get some way to replicating that by making the size of the sun bigger. What that does is it means that light's coming from a wider area, so the shadows are going to be more spread out. If you don't believe me, just try and play with this number. Set the 1 to 1, do a render, set it to like 15, do a render, and you'll see how the shadows like just blur out a little bit. That's my trick. We've got no real geometry going on. The Rhino ground plane is turned off because we don't want to render a ground plane or anything like that. We've got no real textures going on, and then we get into settings, and this is where we set up the actual render that we're going to do. Let's make sure that we have our view in the right place. There we go. There's our view. I'm going to use non-interactive CPU, non-progressive, medium quality render. I'll just go through that again. I'm going to use my CPU, not my GPU, because it's way easier and simpler to use the CPU, and V-Ray will do everything you need it to do. Maybe it takes a few seconds longer. Does it really matter? No, not in the slightest. I don't need it to be interactive. When I change my viewport here, I don't want the render to rerun. I just want to leave it going, and then when it's done, I want it to tell me I'm done. And I don't need it to be progressive. I'm not going to like leave it overnight to get better and better and better and better. I just want it to do the render, and when it's finished, it'll tell me. And the quality, I don't need it to be super high quality because I'm just testing this out. When you get to the end of your project, maybe you want it high, but if you set it to be high and your render takes 4 hours and you're sitting twiddling your thumbs, way better to have a low quality render and you've got time to do a drawing at the same time. Yeah. So don't worry about whacking that quality all the way up to like super, super high. And then we're going to set up our camera. So this is what we're looking at now is a camera view, a standard camera. It's not stereo where we'd have like a left and a right for 3D. Not to worry about that. And then the exposure we need to have control over. At the moment it's 13. And basically what this number does is the higher the number goes, the dimmer the overall picture is going to be when we render it. You're a photographer, right? So it's exactly the same as like an aperture. You close down the aperture, you let in less light, your picture gets dimmer. And what this allows you to do is you can have other light sources in your scene. You have a sun turned up really high, you could have sun turned down really low and street lights, but your camera is going to have to react to that amount of light differently. And so this gives you control. And it's just a slider. Get bigger, get smaller. And what we'll do is we'll do a little test. We'll see if it comes out really bright or really dark, and we'll change the number and try again. It's the easiest way. And then down here, I'm not using depth of field or any effects. my render output, I've just turned safe frame on. And what I'm going to do is just be a little bit cheeky. And I want to get the properties of this image. 4096 by 3072. So in an ideal world, I mean, this might take a little while. 4096 by 3072. That tells me that this is a 4:3 picture. Yeah. Now, for me to render 4096 pixels by 3072 pixels, that's a big render. So for now, I'm just going to notch this down to like 2000 by 1500, something like that. So, I mean, it's a decent size, 2000 pixels wide, but it's not like 800 pixels wide. So it's enough to see some detail, but I'm not going to spend hours and hours and hours waiting for all these pixels to render. And this is really helpful. This safe frame shows me the aspect ratio of the image that I'm about to create. And then the rest I'm leaving off. I've got global illumination on, but I'm not gonna worry about all these things. If I want to, I can material override. I can make the whole thing out of the same material, even though I've added materials to the thing. It's quite useful for like a test. But for now, I just want to do a test render. So I've set everything up. You can play with the rest to your heart's content and read about them online and spend hours waiting for stuff to finish. And that's your main areas to set up. I don't even need that one open. Okay. And when I want to render, I click my teapot and off it goes. And then it's done. It's pretty quick. Part of the reason it's quick is I don't have much geometry. My geometry is really light, doesn't have tons of isocurves. I'm not doing a super high res render. I'm only rendering one tiny bit in the image like Mir does. This is like their business model is so clever. Like half the building isn't even modeled. It looks pretty cool. Yeah. I mean, maybe you hate it. I don't know. I finished rendering and it's taken no time at all. That was CPU rendering, not GPU. Not accelerated, just CPU rendering. So if you come to me later in the year and say, my render takes 8 hours, it doesn't have to. It's probably your modeling's bad. Right, I'm going to save that. I'll make a little folder, call it renders. And I'm going to save it as test render 1 as a PNG. It's important we save it as a PNG because I need the background to be see-through because I'm going to put it on my image. So I'll save that and then Photoshop. The absolute dream of every architectural visualizer in the world ever, Photoshop. It's like the best thing ever. Let's open up my base image. Here we are. And then I also want to go to find my render folder structure. Otherwise, you'll never find it. And I'll drag this in and I'm going to do something useful in Photoshop. If you're Photoshop experts, you know this already. But if you drag it in and just let go, it'll just put it wherever you put your mouse. But if you hold down Shift, it will put it bang in the center, aligned with the thing. And then, because I know that my aspect ratio of my images were exactly the same, I can align it to the edges and I will get exactly the same output that I got when I was setting up my safe frame. That makes sense? Okay. Tanash, you were asking about shadows, and you're quite right. There's some shadows missing on the grass. So I'm just going to do that very quickly. I'm going to make a new layer of a solid black color. And I'm going to put it underneath my render, but above the background. And then I'm going to select the layer mask that comes with my new solid color layer and fill it full of black color. So I've basically turned off that layer with the layer mask. You all know how layer masks work in Photoshop? If you don't, find someone who's nodding just now and get them to give you an amazing tutorial about layer masks because it will change your life. Then I'm going to select my brush tool. I'm going to set my opacity really low, like, I don't know, 12, 13%. And I'm going to paint in white. And wherever I paint, I get this black coming through. And even better, if I select this to a multiply layer. So I'm multiplying whatever the site is with a black color. If I multiply by black, what I'm effectively doing is making it darker. That's all I'm doing. So it's just a simple way of painting in shadows. So I can paint out shadows by painting in black. I can paint in shadows by painting in white. In fact, I'm just going to turn my opacity up and get rid of this. So, and I really like working at really low opacity brushes because then I can go over stuff. And I know the sun's coming in from this direction. So I'm putting in, I'm being quite rough. And it's okay to be rough because if you make a mistake, you just X to switch from your foreground color to your background color. And then you can paint in shadows, paint out shadows. Yeah. And there's probably going to be shading here. And there's going to be a bit of ambient occlusion where the ground and the wall touch each other. So maybe I can add a little bit like that, but I've gone a bit too far, so I'll just paint in white to take it out. And now suddenly it's starting to look like this thing actually might belong in this site. Maybe. I don't know. Getting somewhere. Not bad for like an hour's work. Maybe I don't like how this material's working. So I go back, change the material, I re-render it. How long did it take to render? Like 5 seconds. So if when we get freed up to do things quickly, we can change our mind about something, go back, change it quickly, and then re-render. If we're still modeling, then we've got nothing to show. And now I can have a conversation about whether this works architecturally. Yeah. And I personally, I don't think it's great, but there's something kind of nice about the way that, you know, this, where's my alt? Yeah. The way that there's a kind of route through that leads to the Headington Hill Hall. It wasn't quite what I had in mind because I thought about that coming down the hill, but maybe it works. I don't know. There's a, I can't move this now. Why can't I move this? I'll just zoom out. There we go. There's something interesting about this kind of sloped glazing that maybe we need to have a little conversation about and see how it works. And maybe we need to see a bit more reflections in that, because at the moment I can see a little bit of this wall being reflected up there, but it doesn't read particularly well. So it might be that we need to change some of the properties of the materials. But we're into small things now. We can have a conversation about the architecture here. And those shadows don't take me very long at all. I don't need to like recalculate anything. I just grab a brush and I do what feels sort of natural. It's kind of a bit more like hand sketching, if anything. And there's a starting point. Maybe the next layer is actually I want some landscape going on here, which is I'm going to do all that in Photoshop. I'm not going to try and render plants. So grab some plant PNGs from wherever you get them from, put them in, arrange them the way you want to arrange them, and then you're building an image. You're not trying to do the whole thing in Rhino. That is everything that I had on my list for image making. And it's probably a bit of a whistle-top tour. So what do you want to do? Questions? Take a break? Do questions in a minute? Questions. All right. What do you want to talk about?
Can you get an educational version of
V-Ray? All the computers here have V-Ray. So what I would suggest you do is you do your modeling at home, you bring your model in, and then you load it up on these, and then you render here. V-Ray is expensive. I own V-Ray because I use it all the time, but it is expensive.
Maybe like one thing I will ask you, because I know it's possible you can do it. You can show the post-production on the how you can even change the material on the Photoshop.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, so V-Ray does does a really cool thing, which is really helpful for this later. I'll just close this. One of the options that you have when you output is in this guy here is switches. Oh no, not switches. There's a way that you can output block colors in that respond that are related to the materials that you put there. So you can change your material in Photoshop rather than having to re-render it in V-Ray. Personally, because I think that most of the way that I work is pretty fast anyway, it's just as good for me to change materials in V-Ray, but you may decide you want to do something differently. The other way of doing it is in your material palette, just create a whole load of crazy colored materials that are just solid, like green, a solid purple, a solid blue, a solid red, and then render them out, and then use that image, select by color in Photoshop, and then map in your materials. Enscape has that really nice thing. I'm sure there's a way, and I can't remember where it is.
You can take the render output as like alpha beta that gives you this in that.
Yes. You
on the render frame, I think it is.
Render frame.
Yeah. The settings of that, taking that alpha beta.
Oh, render parameters.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's not a technique I use generally.
Maybe when you click on render quiz again, the setup to render frame.
This one.
No. Click on render. Try to take the output. And then on that settings on that.
Oh, so you can save. There are channels. That's it.
Yeah.
So there's an RGB, and there's also there's a distance thing as well. So you can add fog to your renders, which is really cool. It's Photoshop fog, where you where's my somewhere. This is a new version of V-Ray. I'm still finding out where everything is. But you can add, it's not just alpha, but it's like, it's this, but the further something is away, the darker it is. And then you can use that as an alpha, as a mask in Photoshop and add like a white sort of multiply layer. And then it looks great. It looks very cool. And now I've lost everything. Other questions?
A website that we can get good quality materials.
Yes, there are plenty. Enscape I don't like it as a piece of software, but it does have this really useful website, which is in their blog. And it's like a whole list of free resources where you can get textures, all of this, HDRIs. Yeah, I use textures.com a lot. I've got an account with them. I mean, obviously they're more focused on Enscape, so it's more so optimized for GPU rendering. But this list is the best list I've found for like where you can get stuff.
Can you send us that in an email?
Yeah, I was just copying it for you. Where did I do this? This one. There you go. All yours. Yeah.
Question not related to rendering or viewing of Rhino, but to the module in the studio. So we have this advanced technology module, and we have submission in December. And
Yeah.
Scott said to us last week that the submission is basically from the studio to the studio. So yeah, if we can have some, I mean, information or guidance, or maybe later on it will come up. But yeah, this is something
It
that we
will-
have to do, and it's going to be
Does this
Yeah.
semester be marked?
Was that?
Will this semester be marked? The studio.
We have a submission for the advanced thing in.
Yeah, but that's not marked.
It is.
Is it?
So
Oh, okay.
you get the way to think about it is that you submit a portfolio at the end of the year, and it's a unified portfolio. So your design proposal is worth 100 pages or 200 pages of your work. Some of that work will be technical work about how you're going to construct it, how it's going to stand up, how it's going to perform environmentally, what the site's like, what the context is, what the climate is, what materials you're using, how have you tested those materials, how do you know it's going to perform the way you want it to perform. But we could go on and on and on and talk all about that technology. There's also a process of design where, but those two should be complementary and inform one another. And so one of the very special things about second year MArchD is that there is an expectation that those two are unified. So instead of thinking, I've got my technology marks over here and I've got my design marks over here, it's actually, this is my portfolio. Either you believe in me as an architect or you don't. If you think about it like that, you're far more likely to hit all the numbers. And at this point in the year, I would be thinking the last thing that I would encourage you to think about is marks. Just don't worry about it. The one thing that will affect marks is your ability to just refine your process and keep producing. And the story that I always keep coming back to is a friend of one of my previous tutors who in his master's project was all over the shop. Like his concept was all over the place, his program was like rubbish, but he just every week he would bring something new that he'd done. It was a physical model, or it was a digital model, or it was some cool thing that he'd found that he turned into something else. And by the end of the year, he had everything that he needed for his portfolio because he was constantly going through the process of production and taking it seriously. And at that point in the year, you can sit down. Then later on, we can sit down and go, okay, how are we going to structure this portfolio? Is there anything that's missing? Do we need to have another page on your environmental site analysis? Or do we need another page on structure? Or do we need another page? But if you're trusting that process, we'll get to that point. Right now, if you worry about, oh, but I don't know, like we designed this, got no idea whether it's steel or timber or concrete that's holding this thing up. Is it like attached down to the ground and then there's like a big tent pole in the middle and the whole thing's in tension, or is it in compression? Is it held up at the edges? I don't know, but I do know that I need to answer that question. I just haven't answered the question yet. And the important thing for us is that you need to answer the question, not that you've answered it. Because if you answer it, then suddenly your project will not evolve because you've gone, oh, there's a temple in the middle. Well, okay, great. But where does I want to keep thinking about space. The two need to happen at once. But I suppose for both Ricardo and I, we care that the process gets you where you need to go. And then at the end of the year, we'll start worrying about marks.
So in December, we're sort of submitting a portfolio version of the work so far, and that will include both design and technology integrated within each other.
So we spent a lot of time today thinking about how we use Rhino to communicate feeling, atmosphere, materiality. One thing that I didn't look at, but I'd encourage you to play with is volumetric environments, where you can add fog to your environment when you render it. And then suddenly your image is going to start having just a sense of depth and a sense of scale. There's something very flat at the moment about this. It's just like you've plunked a thing on a thing. It just makes me want to like grab like a white layer, turn it to screen, turn it black, grab myself a brush, and like, what's that?
Is that the main way of making fog?
Well, you can render it. It does take time, but you can render it. But it just the thing is, this kind of makes me want to like go there on a cloudy day, not a sunny day, and like, what if my image was a bit more like this, you know? And then actually, I mean, like this, I do a lot more work on this, but do you know what I mean? Like suddenly I can actually imagine myself in that image because there's less information. Do a better job than that, but if you want to know, like, there's a few nice little Photoshop techniques like God rays, like God rays. You can do cool things like I won't show you now because I'll go down the rabbit hole. But what we're talking about, that I started that sentence by saying this week was about feeling and atmosphere and materiality, and like, what is it like to stand in your space or to stand next to your space and look at it? We didn't even look at what an internal view would look like, but that would be cool to do, wouldn't it? If you got a photo looking down the site and you put your camera in the thing and you rendered just the view you see, cool. But next week we're going to start looking at, well, actually a lot of our diagrams might well be about environmental performance, and we're getting really technical then. So we're like, okay, this glass, I know the values for that glass, that performance. I know how much space I need to keep warm. I know my air tightness or my buildup of my roof or whatever, and I can start to actually do some analysis of how that's going to perform on the site. And there's some nice software that we can look at that will do that. But that's how the project is formed, isn't it? It's like I've gone super down the atmosphere route, and I go super down the clarity and the technology route, and then the two things come together, and you're an architect. Okay, it's 11:10. I'm keen we do get a break, but I'm happy to chat more if you want. I like chatting. You probably know this, right? Any more questions, or are we craving coffee?
I have a fabrication question, but I think I'll just ask you that.
About the dome?
Yeah, but it's better if you like see.
Yeah, sure. Have you got some models?
In Rhino.
Great. Then there'll be a million different ways of building it. Cool. All right. I'm going to get rid of that.
I quite like the fog.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. Like,
Have you made it more like transparent?
man, I mean, guys,
Yeah.
just like, oh man, look at that.
Is that the building?
The building is two cubes with a tiny window in a corner. How long did that take to model? Like 5 seconds to model it? And then they probably spent 5 days in Photoshop. But oh, how good it looks. You get what it's like to be there, right? You get the context. You know how it feels. You know how cold it is. You know that it's going to rain on you at any moment. You know what it would be like to be approaching that building and all the things that are going off in your mind. You're like, I feel it. I've communicated that. And then later on, you could do a GA of that building. Yeah, fine, do a drawing, but it doesn't do anywhere near as good as that does to show you what it's like. That, I mean, that's...
Olivia's trying to say something.
She's unmute. Go, go, go.
Maybe the audio is not working.
Oh, I can hear you. Hello? Oh, wait, wait, hang on a sec. Hang on.
Zoom maybe is on the Mac.
Yeah. I want to do this, this, and this. What? Say hello, Olivia. Say hello, Olivia. Try again.
Hi.
Hey, I can hear you. Sorry, I don't know. I think when the fire alarm went off, it all went wrong.
I was just asking, I know there's a way to like put lights in Rhino and put
Yes.
them inside your building. Is that like I don't know how to do it, but is that something you can show us? Is that something you'd recommend?
Yeah, so it's exactly like this image here, right? The light's sort of there from outside, but really the light's coming from inside. The way to do it is actually surprisingly simple. I'm just going to close this and close this and close this. I'm going to make a new layer. Call it lights. Maybe make it like orange or something. I don't know. This V-Ray tab, which you should all have on your university computers, this area here has a whole load of different kinds of lights. You can have a rectangle light, a sphere light, a point light. Let's put a point light in. And what that does is give me a point, which is like a little light. And that light, that emits light in my scene. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to attach it to the top of that wall and then move it to where it needs to be, which for me is going to be inside this building, right? And maybe just drag it up a little bit. So it's right in the middle of the building. And you can't see it because it's kind of behind the wall there, but it's there. You can also tell it's there because do you see the shadows move? As I move the light, the shadows are moving. Then when I go back to my V-Ray asset editor, I've got two lights. I've got one called an Omni light and one called a Rhino Document Sun. And my light is at 100 intensity and my sun is at a 1 intensity. Suns are really powerful. Point lights are not very powerful. So you need to turn them up in order to see them. If I do something ridiculous and like put that to 1,000, you see how bright that is? If I now do a render, what's it done? It's rendered ground plane. Oh, I know why it's done. I turned on environment fog. Let's turn that off. I'll do another render. There we go. Now you won't see the light, but the light is now illuminating other things around it. You can probably see not much at all. There's not much going on. So it may be that the light needs to be even more bright to counteract the sun, because the sun's pretty bright. I don't know if you try like looking at these lights up here, they don't do anything compared to the window outside. So let's do another render. I'm just going to try, I'm turning it up to like super, super, super brightness just to see what will happen. Yeah, the glass material should not be affecting it because the glass will be letting that light through because it's refractive. But in answer to your question, with a bit of fiddling, you literally, you drag these elements into your building, into your design. If I put a sphere light in and I put it just there, oh, I don't know why it's, there we go. Here's a sphere. drag it to like here. This sphere light, one of the things that you can do is you can make it invisible, so you only see the light that it emits, or you can make it visible, so you'd see like a ball, like a little tiny sun in there. And if I render now, we should see, yeah, here we go, got this ball, right, sitting in space, and that. So I do know it's working. That's helpful. At least we know it's working. Yeah. So it'll render these things. Part of the reason why we probably can't see anything is because the sun is just so super bright. That's yeah. So if we turn the sun off, just that goes kind of gray, or we can set the intensity of the sun to 0. Then two things are going to happen. The first is that our render is going to be super dark. You see? Ah, now we can start to see that point light. You can see there's a little tiny glow on the inside. It's just because the point light is a tiny, tiny point light, and you have to turn it up really, really bright to see anything. The sphere light, again, our camera was set up to react to the sun. So what we may need to do now is to turn that exposure value down, so we're letting in more light into the camera. And now suddenly everything's brighter. We're getting more light in because I've turned the sun off. And that's coming from the point light and the sphere light, and that's it. It's also coming from a bit of global illumination, but we can turn that off as well. If we go back to here, I turn the sphere off. Let's make a rectangle light. This has a direction, so I'm going to just turn it down like this and tilt it towards my building. So it's like that. Yeah. And now if I render that. Yeah. So you see the backside of this rectangle light, and you get this lovely like diffuse light because the rectangle is effectively this huge source of light. So it gives you this lovely kind of like all the shadows get really blurred out. But ideally what we probably want to do is turn that rectangle light, make it invisible so that we don't see the big black square. There we go. Yeah. Does that answer your question, Olivia?
Yes, thank you.
All right. I think it definitely is time for a break now because we've been going. I'm going to stop the recording and come back at 11:30. All right.